everyone. I'm not dressed for the occasion. I didn't know I was going to have Hello? I didn't know I was going to have a part in this today. I think Kelly must be, our mayor must be detained, but I do want to welcome the League of Women Voters and thank them for agreeing to, or for allowing us to host this forum on roads, which is really timely because in Lathrup Village we're also looking at having a ballot proposal to improve our roads, so this is very timely. And I also want to thank the panelists for coming and spending your time to educate us and answer questions from the people in the audience. So thanks everybody for coming, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Cantor. Good evening. So my name is Charlie Carpenter. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters. There are several other members of the League here today, Jim Terhan, Jenny Rinsler, Kathy and Jenny, and several. Well, thank you all for joining us. A lot of work went into tonight's presentation, and appreciate the help from everybody. If you don't know, the League of Women Voters is a volunteer, a nonpartisan organization. We have a public service mission of engaging, educating, and exciting voters. We do a number of things like voter registration drives. We have the 411 website and campaign forums to help people understand who the candidates are that are running for office in their local communities. We were part of the successful effort last year for Proposition 2, sometimes called Voters Not Politicians, and also Proposition 3, sometimes called Promote the Vote. If you're interested in helping build our democracy, please stop by at our table on the way out and get more information about the League. Or you can go to our website, which is lwvoa.org. It's up there in red. Along with the City of Lathrup Village, we're very pleased to present tonight's program, Paving the Way to Better Roads. We have three very knowledgeable speakers here to help us better understand this issue. Let me introduce them. Craig Bryson is the Senior Communications Manager for the Road Commission of Oakland County. He's been with the Road Commission for over 20 years and really has a great perspective on the local issues here in Oakland County. Ron Fisher on the end is Professor of Economics at Michigan State University. He's a former Deputy Treasurer for the state of Michigan, and he's an expert in government financing and taxation. Welcome, Professor Fisher. And then in the middle is Eric Lufer. Eric is president of the Citizens Research Council. This is Michigan's oldest public policy research organization, and they've studied a number of different proposals to fix our roads and can speak to the pros and cons of all of those. So in terms of our agenda for tonight, each of the speakers will go through a presentation of about 15 minutes. And then we'll ask for questions from you in the audience. It's a nice cozy group here today, so we'll try and just see if you raise your hand, we can get your question. We also have folks that can bring a little card out to you and write down your question. I can read it from up here. And then we'll conclude allowing each speaker a couple minutes to offer some closing remarks. And we ask that everyone be polite, and now would probably be a good time to silence your phone if you haven't already done that. Okay, so let's kick it over to the speakers. Mr. Bryson from the Road Commission will go first.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Let's see. There we go. Okay, it's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. Again, my name is Craig Bryson with the Road Commission for Oakland County. I'll start out by just providing a little bit of background information about who and what the Road Commission is. One big misnomer, we are not part of Oakland County general government. We don't report to the county executive or the county commission. Unlike Wayne and Macomb counties, we're an independent governmental entity. We're not funded by the county. We currently have about 426 employees. That's less than we had in 1962. Our current year budget is $155 million. We maintain the largest county road system in the state of Michigan. And even though Oakland County is the wealthiest county in the state on a per capita basis, we still have 755 miles of unpaved roads. That's more unpaved roads than some counties in Michigan have total roads. We also maintain all of the state highways in the county, all the IM and US routes. We're a contractor to the State Department of Transportation for that. 97% of all the traffic signals in the county, all the state signals, our signals, and all the city and village signals except those in Royal Oak, and 150,000 road signs. So that's a little bit about who we are. So cutting right to the chase, Michigan roads are terrible, that's no secret. Why are other states' roads in better shape? That's one of the most frequent questions we get at the Road Commission. And to be blunt, it's a factor of funding. A former state legislature told me that road condition is simply a factor of the level of investment. And this graph gives a good indication of how Michigan has failed to invest in our road system for at least 50 years. This is per capita spending, Michigan's rank in the nation compared to every other state. And what it indicates is in the areas of health, education, and welfare, we've done relatively well compared to most other states. But when it comes to roads, we've been in the bottom 9 states in the nation since at least 1964. We in Michigan have not made roads a priority like nearly every other state is. That means each one of us has paid less to maintain our roads than the residents of most other states. So what is road funding? Where does it come from? In Michigan, this graph shows the main two sources of funding are the gas tax and the vehicle registration fees, or your license plate fees. In the future, there'll be general fund dollars in there, but right now, those are the two largest sources. What's not in there, by the way, is your property taxes. We do not receive any of your property taxes. Your city does, but we do not. So I want to start out talking about Act 51. You may have heard of that. There's a lot of discussion in the state that the problem is this law called Act 51. That's why roads are bad in Michigan. So I want to talk a little bit about what that is. That's the state law that establishes the powers and duties of state and local road agencies, classifies all public roads, establishes something called the Michigan Transportation Fund, which is this pot of all road funding in the state of Michigan, and then it allocates those dollars by creating formulas to decide how much each county road commission gets, each city and village, and the State Department of Transportation. And then it provides a process to allow for the amendment of the act. One of the criticisms of Act 51 is that it was adopted, it was enacted in 1951. So that's true, it's been around for a long time. A lot of people say, therefore, it's outdated, and that's the problem. We have an old law, it doesn't reflect current times in Michigan. We would argue that's not the case. It's been amended more than 100 times since 1951. The road funding distribution formula has been amended 25 times. 54 of the 75 sections of the Act, or 72% of the Act, have been added, since 1951. And only 12 sections remain in the original form, and so on. The bottom line is this is not the same Act that was enacted in 1951. The state legislature has done a pretty decent job of bringing this act up to date as times have changed, populations have shifted, et cetera, in Michigan. So we would argue, our position is, the problem is not Act 51. Act 51 does a pretty good job of allocating insufficient revenue through fair means across the state. The problem is there's not enough money coming into Act 51 to maintain our roads. So you probably heard that back in 2015, Governor Snyder and the state legislature passed a road funding act to increase road funding. It did not begin to take effect until 2017, but it was enacted late 2015, signed by Governor Snyder. It was intended to raise $1.2 billion a year. Now, despite what some legislators have said in recent days and weeks, it was never intended to solve Michigan's road funding problem completely. Governor Snyder at the time said it's a good start. He said we also need $2.5 billion in additional funding on top of this, but this is what we can get today. So this is what it did. As of January 1, 2017, you probably remember, it raised the gas tax from 19 cents a gallon to 26.3 cents a gallon, raised the diesel tax to the same level. So for the first time in many, many years, the gas and diesel tax are at the same rate, and it raised vehicle registration fees by 20%. It also created a surcharge for electric and hybrid cars. Since those cars either use no fuel or less fuel, they're paying a lot less fuel taxes, so this allows them to contribute to the maintenance of the roads. Those elements generated half of the new revenue. So it's supposed to raise $1.2 billion a year. Those elements raise $600 million a year. The second half, the second $600 million will come from the state's general fund, or at least that's the plan. So let me talk a little bit about those general fund dollars. According to the state legislation, the general fund dollars are to be allocated this way. Starting this year, $150 million comes out of the general fund and goes to road funding. Next year, $325 million, and then in 2021, $600 million a year from the general fund, and in every subsequent year after that, $600 million from the general fund going to roads. That's the idea, that's the plan. Also, the state legislature this year found an additional $414 million in the general fund and allocated that to roads, a one-time additional bump, which we were pleased to see. We have some concerns from our point of view about these general fund dollars. If the legislature does not replace those general fund dollars, which is part of Governor Whitmer's proposal and some of the things the state legislators talked about, if they don't do that and we continue to presume we're going to get that money, what happens if the general fund does not grow by $600 million? What happens when, and not if, but when the state goes into recession? Because the economy has been in growth mode for way too long. It's going to go into recession at some point. General fund revenues likely will decrease, maybe at least stay stable. Or what happens when the state has to start paying for the Medicaid expansion that was part of Obamacare and that the federal government's no longer going to pay for? Their only source of funding for that is the general fund. My point is there's lots of competing interests for general fund dollars. We are very concerned that at some point the state legislature will be pressured to reduce that $600 million. So we're not comfortable that it's going to be there forever. But what does that mean? Assuming it is there, this is what it would mean for my agency, for the Road Commissioner for Oakland County. In 2017, we got $15 million of additional funding. Last year, we got 20. This year, we're anticipating getting 26, 33, and 44. And then that 44 would grow gradually, but about that level, you know, for perpetuity, at least in theory. A little reality check. So that first $600 million, the money we got from the gas tax increase, diesel tax, and the vehicle registration increase primarily, is helping us stabilize the road system. Our roads in Oakland County had been deteriorating year after year after year after year for many years, getting worse and worse and worse. That our share of that first $600 million is allowing us to flatten that curve, to level things out, stop the deterioration. The second $600 million, when that general fund revenue starts to flow in this year, will allow us to begin to slowly restore the system. But there's a big caveat to that. Even with all that new funding, the whole $1.2 billion, or our share of that, the best we will do is get our roads to 51% of our paved roads into good condition by 2025, according to all our computer modeling, and then the condition will begin to deteriorate again. The buying power of those dollars will begin to drop off after 2025 and will start to go down. Why is that? Because where we're starting today, you probably can't see this pie graph, but what this shows is the current condition of the roads in Oakland County. And again, you can't see it, but the green slice is the portion of roads in good condition today. 16%. 16% of our roads are in good condition today. 63% are in poor condition. Again, by 2025, we'll get to 51% in good condition. It's a huge increase over where we are, but it's hardly a worthwhile goal that we want to shoot for. We would love to be in much better shape. Here's a visual depiction of that. This is kind of hard to see again, but this is from 2006. We have green roads are in good shape, yellow roads are in fair shape, and red roads are in poor shape. The key thing to notice in this graph is there's not very much red lines back in 2006. Here's where we are today. a lot more red lines. The roads have really deteriorated since 2006. This is the problem we're facing today. So, the bottom line, the main point of the whole road funding debate is, do we really need more road funding? And the answer emphatically, from our position, is yes. Every objective study that's been done has said the state needs substantially more road funding. Under both the Snyder governor administration and the Whitmer administration, they've asserted that we need an additional $2.5 billion a year to fix our roads. A recent study was done by the County Road Association of Michigan. That's the organization that represents all of us county road commissions in the state. They determined that we need $2 billion annually just to bring county roads up to 75% good. Not 100% good, 75% good. We've looked at our own roads. We can do the modeling. We can make predictions. We estimate that just in Oakland County, we need $1.5 to $2 billion over the next 10 years to bring our roads up to good condition. That's $150 million to $200 million in additional revenue every year. And that's just looking at the surface condition, the potholes essentially. If you want to address the congestion on roads like Southfield Road right outside this building, that's a $3 billion price tag over 10 years. So you've heard about Governor Whitmer's proposal. She wants to raise the gas tax by 45 cents over 18 months to generate that $2.5 billion. And in doing so, she would eliminate the general fund contribution to roads that I talked about that was created under the Snyder package. We're waiting for the Republican proposal. You may have heard a lot of the discussions. The Republicans in Lansing, the legislature, are bouncing around a bunch of different ideas of how to potentially generate road funding. We're waiting for that official proposal. Just real quickly, what we're doing with the new money we do have is fixing road condition. We're resurfacing a record number of roads this year, repairing bridges and culverts. We also have an equipment deficit. During the lean years of the last 15 years, there was a point where for 6 years we didn't buy a new piece of equipment. Today we need $20 million worth of new trucks, graders, tow trucks, everything we use to maintain the roads today. We also need people. As I mentioned, we have less people today than we had in 1962. We reached a high water mark for employees in 2007. We've cut our staff 35% since then because of funding. We're never going to get back to that 2007 level, but we do need more people. We're doing records amounts of work, and we need people to do the work. So, bottom line, what we would like to see in a road funding package from the state. We need a plan that realistically generates enough revenue to actually solve the problem. One of the big criticisms of the Snyder plan in 2015 was that it was way low. Everybody thought, okay, we raised taxes, we've solved the problem, right? But everybody knew at the time that wasn't really enough money to solve the problem. We need an adequate amount of money. We need a reliable, guaranteed funding source. We don't view the general fund as reliable or guaranteed. The state gas tax, whether you like gas tax or not, one of the benefits of it is it's constitutionally protected. It has to go to transportation. We like that. No contractor is going to hire people or buy equipment to build roads if the funding source is not guaranteed. We can't budget comfortably multiple years out into the future if that funding is not guaranteed. We need a guaranteed funding source. And it can't be cut by the state legislature. And we need a strategy to implement it. One of our disappointments with Governor Whitmer's proposal is that we didn't even know about the proposal until it came out. Every time road funding has been increased in the past, there's been a lot of work going in before the proposal came out. A coalition was put together. Everybody was on the same page. They were ready to fight for the plan when it was announced. That didn't happen. We didn't learn about it until it came out. There are elements of it that we aren't thrilled with. All the people who should be out there helping to support a plan like that are not necessarily lined up in support of the plan. So we need a better strategy to implement a plan. And that's all I have. Thank you very much. We can have questions after.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. So next we'll hear from Ron Fisher, Professor of Economics from Michigan State University.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate the Oakland Area League of Women Voters organizing the session this evening, and thanks to all of you for coming to listen to us. And Craig is giving you perspective, the local perspective. I'm going to try to take a more the state perspective. And so I want to start by getting a sense of what you all think. So here's my first question. What do you think about the condition of roads in Michigan, not just locally, but across the state? Are they better than they were 20 years ago, worse, or the same? How many people think they're better today than they were 20 years ago? Anybody? Nobody. How many people think they're about the same as they were 20 years ago? Nobody. How many people think they're worse than they were? Amazing. This is great news. Because we all know that the first thing that's necessary to solve any problem is to recognize you have a problem. And it's very interesting what happened tonight, because just recently there was a survey done in New Hampshire where they asked that question. And a third of the voters in New Hampshire said roads were better than they were 20 years ago, even though all the objective evidence said otherwise. So we recognize we have a problem. Good step. Next question. We all pay state gasoline taxes, as Greg has explained to you. How much does a typical driver in Michigan pay per month in state gasoline taxes? And I'm giving you choices: 6, 12, 25, 36, 50. Sounds like a bingo game. What does the typical driver pay in gasoline taxes per month? How many people think it's $6 a month? I've got a couple of you like that. How many people think it's 12? Got a few of you there. How about 25? 36? Anybody for 50? Well, the answer is 12. $12 a month. Think about that. Think about that. Compare that to your monthly bill for your cell phone, or for your electricity and gas service, or for your television, however you get it, or for your water bill. You're paying $12 a month for the roads in Michigan. That's incredibly a bargain, it seems to me. Here's my next question for you. How much more would you be willing to pay? From whatever source we collected, and Greg laid out some of the sources for you, from whatever source it is, how much more would you be willing to pay per month to fix Michigan roads? 40, 30, 20, 10, or 0? How many people would be willing to pay $40 a month more? We got a few people there. How about 30? 20? 10? How about the 0 folks? Where are they? There've got to be some 0 folks. And how do I know there are 0 folks? Well, I know that for the following reason. About 3 or 4 years ago, we did a survey across the state. And the first question is, should the state be spending more money on maintenance of roads? 89% of the folks said yes, absolutely. Everybody wants the state to spend more money on roads. Next question is, how much more would you be willing to pay? And 43% of the people said 0. So half of the people who wanted the state to spend more money on roads were willing not to pay anything to do it. Now, I understand this. Everybody wants a free lunch. I, too, want a free lunch. I would love to get something for nothing. But unfortunately, I'm an economist. And one of the things we teach people in economics is, ain't no free lunch. Okay? But that was very interesting. How much do you think the average driver pays in gasoline taxes in Michigan? We asked this survey. 3/4 of the people thought it was $30 or more. And at that time, the actual answer was 10. So how do I think about this problem? Here's how I think about this problem. Imagine you go into McDonald's, and there's a menu, but there are no prices. And there's a Big Mac up there, and somebody told you the Big Mac costs $25. Woo! If you thought the Big Mac was $25, would you buy one? Probably not, okay? It's really only $3 or $4. So it's cheap. But if you think the price is really high, if people overestimate how much they pay in gasoline taxes, then it's not surprising that they're not willing to pay more money to fund the roads. How do we get in this problem? Well, Greg gave me some information. I'll give you some more. If you look between 2000 up to the most recent data, 2016, Michigan was absolutely last among all the states in highway capital spending. We were at $150 per person per year. The average state was double that at $300. And the Great Lakes states were more than that. They were almost $350 a month per person per year. We're just not spending enough money. Now, what if we take a long-run perspective? And I'm going to take you way back into the 1950s. How many people here remember the 1950s? A few of us, I do, okay. Way back into the 1950s. How are things different? Well, this is capital spending on all kinds of capital investment, not just roads and bridges, but schools and government buildings and water and sewer systems. Back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we were spending 3% of our income on those things. These days, we're spending 1.5% of our income, half as much. Well, if you think about it, it was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, in the post-World War II baby boom, when all of this stuff was built. That's when we built the interstate highways. So we built a lot of new communities. We built schools. We built the water and sewer systems. They're now 50 and 60 years old. We were spending a lot more money then. Somebody in the past spent money to build these things, and today we're spending a lot less. Now, there's always concern about using taxes. So I thought I should tell you a little bit about the history of taxes in Michigan. This is the tax history in Michigan. This is all state and local taxes of all types. Income taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, gasoline taxes, cigarette taxes, all taxes on all levels of government in Michigan divided by income. Look where we are. We're at the lowest point. The only point as low as it is now, and my whole chart is in 1960. And to go back to 1960 to have taxes as low in Michigan as they are today. We've continued to either not increase taxes, not have a modern tax system, or reduce tax rates, which has put us in a really dire strait. So everybody, again, I understand. We all want something for nothing. I, too, want something for nothing. And so when we talk to people who say, oh, my taxes are really high. Objectively, factually, taxes are the lowest they've been in Michigan in 60 years. So how are we going to fund this problem? Well, I've got some ideas. The gasoline tax. Gasoline tax, as Craig said, has been a traditional way that we funded roads not only in Michigan but nationwide. Every 10 cents of gasoline tax costs the average driver about $4 or $5 a month. That's a really simple way to do the calculation. But the gasoline tax is becoming less and less productive. One, because cars have becoming much more fuel efficient. So the gasoline tax revenue has not been keeping up with use as cars become more fuel efficient. And now we have hybrid cars and electric cars on the road. So the gasoline tax at once was a really very effective mechanism for funding roads. Is not as effective as it used to be. States have had to continue to raise the rates, as we did in Michigan, just to keep revenue keep going along as cars become more, we use less and less gasoline. Tolls. Here's an interesting idea. We have no toll roads in Michigan. I once gave a talk about 10 years ago, and somebody who's in the audience from the Michigan Department of Transportation, and this person said to me, it is the official policy of the Michigan Department of Transportation that there will never be toll roads in Michigan. Well, that's very strange, because nationally, toll roads and revenue from toll roads are growing dramatically fast, as I'm going to show you. And it's something I think we need to reconsider. Here's a mechanism that economists like, a vehicle mileage fee. Suppose you paid a fee per mile driven, just like you pay a fee per gallon of water that you have or per kilowatt of electricity that you consume. Suppose we did that. Well, again, it turns out to be really simple. For the average driver, a fee of 1/2 cent per mile works out to $4 or $5 a month. It's a really simple kind of calculation. It's a really interesting idea. It's being done now in Oregon. It's being investigated very seriously in Minnesota. And it's probably a mechanism that's going to come true in the future, particularly as cars become more and more electronic. And essentially, when we get to autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, it will be trivial to collect vehicle mileage fees, and probably will happen very quickly. But I think it's something we should think about even now. And one of the great values of vehicle mileage fees is how they can vary. If you have a vehicle that causes more damage to the roads, the fee can be higher. If you drive in an area that's very congested, or a time of day that's very congested, you can have a higher fee, which is done in some other parts of the country. That can be done with vehicle mileage fees. It cannot be done so easily with gasoline taxes. And then finally, an idea that's been floated around very recently is perhaps we should take the state income tax and change its structure. We should adopt a progressive rate income tax rather than the flat rate we have. That would modernize the state tax structure dramatically. 32 of the 41 states that have income taxes have progressive rates. So Michigan is very unusual that it does not. I think this is a good idea. But I'm not sure necessarily that this revenue should be the only way to solve the road funding problem. Because, of course, the income tax that you pay is not related to how much you drive on the roads. It doesn't solve congestion problems. It's not a way to solve environmental problems associated with road use. So I think it's a good thing for the state to do, to modernize the tax structure, but it may not be the most effective way to solve road problems. Now, I said to you a minute ago, a lot of other states have toll roads. So I compared between 2016 and 2007, the year before the Great Recession, what's happened to the components of state and local revenue. The fastest growing component of state and local revenue over this time is tolls on toll highways. We don't have any toll roads in Michigan, but most other states do. In fact, all of the Great Lakes states around us do, except for Wisconsin. I was just recently, a couple of months ago, in New York visiting family. Drove back through Canada, then I drive on the New York State Thruway. Toll road, it's an interstate. It existed before the interstate highway system, so it's still tolled. I drove about, 270, 280 miles on that road. I paid a toll that works out to about 4 cents per mile. It's a great road. It's in great condition, has wonderful rest stops with gas stations and commercial establishments. It's really we don't have anything like that in Michigan. But toll roads, and look at the comparison that to the gasoline tax. Motor fuels tax, motor fuels taxes increased 3%, even though lots of states have increased their tax rate, just as Michigan did. The gasoline tax is just not growing very fast anymore as cars are getting more and more fuel efficient. More and more states are moving toward tolls. And of course, my idea of a vehicle mileage fee is just a more extensive toll system collected in a different way. So, what is my suggestion about how to solve this problem? Not that the governor's listening to me, but whatever. Here's an idea. I don't think that one single revenue source is going to solve the problem. I think we need a mixture of sources. So here's a potential idea I throw out just for consideration. How about we raise the gasoline tax by 20 cents a gallon? That's $10 a month for the typical driver, raises $1 billion in revenue for the state government for transportation purposes. And then suppose we had a fee of 1 cent per mile driven. That would cost the typical driver about $10 a month and would raise $1 billion in revenue for state funding for roads. And then how about we start thinking about electronic tolls on some roads where we could use them. I'm still fascinated, by the way, that even on the bridges in Michigan, the Mackinac Bridge and the Blue Water Bridge, where we have tolls, they're still collected in toll booths. And the rest of the world, tolls are collected electronically now. We're way behind. But we could have electronic tolls that fill a little bit of money. A fee on electric cars, it already has a fee on electric cars, and that's scheduled to increase if the gasoline tax increases, but it could be even higher. And how about a sales tax on ride sharing? Ride sharing is becoming more and more popular. It's not as popular here as it is in California. I was recently in San Francisco. That's the only way people in San Francisco get around is on Uber and Lyft, but they're growing. Those vehicles are using our roads. What if we collected a sales tax? San Francisco, I had dinner with the chief economist in the city and county of San Francisco. San Francisco is implementing, in just a couple of months, a 4.5% tax on all ride-sharing services in the city, on Uber and Lyft and other kinds of ride-sharing services. We could do that to generate a little bit more revenue related to road. If you put all that together, we're at $2+ billion. Maybe the $2.5 billion that the governor's office says we need. Not from any one source, from a variety of sources. So has a lot of different features to it, and it's a possibility. That's what I have to say. And I'll be interested in hearing your comments and questions later. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Professor Fisher. And now, finally, Eric Lufer, President of the Citizens Research Council.
Thank you. So first of all, again, thank you all for being here. Thank you, the League of Women Voters, for doing this. The Citizens Research Council, for those of you who don't know, is a 103-year-old organization that was created to do what the League of Women Voters does, right? The League of Women Voters is very much concentrated on elections and that part of democracy. the Citizens Research Council is about finding information about public policy, getting that in the hands of policymakers, the media, academics, but you, the people, so you can think about the policies you want. So we've been doing this, obviously 103 years, there's a long history of doing this. Professor, your beginning point about this mismatch between the need for roads and who's gonna pay for it reminds me of one of our urban legends. I don't know if this happened or not, but it's told in the annals of the Citizens Research Council that back in the 1970s when Michigan was going through one of its many conundrums on how we're gonna keep the lights on and fund government, at some point, as I'm doing today, we were doing sort of the dog and pony show going around the state, talking about why the state was in a financial, the financial trouble and what to do about it, and taxes were in fact going to have to go up if we were going to keep funding our state and local government. And at some point, a little lady in the audience puts her hands up and she says, I understand everything you're saying, that the system's broke, but why do we have to pay more taxes? Why can't government just pay for it? And that's the issue, that we live in our first world nation. We have so many things that government does that we just don't connect the dots, that the tax dollars you pay for are funding those things. And if you don't like how they're provided, maybe we need to pay a little more. That comes out of our pockets. That's the price of living in a civilized society. So I'm going to pick up a little bit on some of what you've already heard, but put a little bit different spin on it so you can understand some of why we're in the situation we're in today. So starting with the gas tax. The gas tax at the same time is the best funding source for roads and the worst funding source for roads. We made the fatal mistake many, many years ago of basing our gas tax on a cents per gallon. You think about every other tax we pay. We pay a 6% income tax. We pay a 4.25% income or sales tax, income tax. You go through cigarette, liquor, this, that, or corporate income tax. They're all based on a percentage. So as our economy grows, as incomes grow, as consumption grows, as the economy grows, you pay the same percent, but it ends up in more money, and government revenues grow in commensurate amounts, and you're able to maintain the things we've done. So we long ago based it on cents per gallon, and back in 1975 we were paying 11 cents per gallon on our fuels, and that just doesn't buy much. And you can see with the depreciation, with the increases in miles per gallon, we from time to time have increased the tax rate, 15 cents, 19 cents, 26.3 cents, and that gives a little spike, but then the miles per gallon, the increased efficiency in our automobiles kicks in, and it's a depreciating source of revenue for our governments. So yes, we're gonna use gas taxes in some form to pay for how we fund our roads. But at some point, we ought to ask, why are we doing this on cents per gallon? Why couldn't we figure out what that is on a percentage base? My lifetime, gas prices have mostly gone in this direction, very rarely in that direction. If that percentage was built in, we wouldn't have to be revisiting this every 8 years saying, we've lost the purchase power of our gasoline and we have to come in and increase the taxes again. When I do this, we have more time, I show the same thing with our vehicle registration fees. And you would say, well, in Michigan, we based it on the value of the vehicle. So again, cost of buying a car is going up, up, up. Certainly the government is benefiting from that. But what happens in year 2? Now you're paying a few percent less, year 3. So it becomes a flat source of revenue, even though every time you buy a vehicle, it costs more. Unless you're driving as much as I do and turning that over on a regular basis, you're holding onto your vehicle, and that's a flat source of revenue for the government. Part of what we've heard, Craig talked a little bit about the Republicans are trying to figure out how they're going to come up with the money. And as a tax-paying resident, I'm very thankful that they're not anxious to increase our taxes, but they're hell-bent on finding money in the general fund. This idea that we have so much waste, fraud, and abuse in our state government that there's just excess money out there. And I'm here to tell you folks, it just ain't true. So if we look at 2000 to project out through 2020, the blue line is the money that is actually come in or we're projecting to come in over that time. And you can see that it has been very flat. We just haven't brought in that money. We, of course, you've been here, our first decade of this century, very difficult times. The billboards last one out of Michigan, turn out the lights. The economy wasn't growing, and you can see the Great Recession where it dipped a little bit. But even coming out of that, our tax revenues going to the state government just have not been growing. And then the gray line there you can see below it is when you account for inflation. We are purchasing basically the same as we were before with less money. There just is not a lot of excess there. So, you know, they're trying to find ways to come up with more money. It is clearly a challenge. You say, well, so what if it's not growing? We have a budget of $57 billion now. Surely you can find $2.5 billion in a $57 billion budget, move things around, reprioritize. But what you need to understand is that almost 23 billion of that, 22.4, is federal money. All the federal money comes in. The federal government gets to decide how that gets spent. The legislature doesn't have any ability to move that around. We have a number of provisions in our state constitution or state law that says income tax revenue, sales tax revenue, the gasoline tax, that comes in and it's dedicated to a specific source, so the legislature doesn't get to move that around. That leaves about $10 billion that is what you would call discretionary revenue, but even that, it's being spent for corrections. So how many prisons do you want to close down so we can fund roads, right? Very little discretion there. Even though it's discretionary spending, we're not anxious to close down a lot of prisons. And you can run through that. So when you really get down to it, it's only about $5.5 billion that is truly discretionary. That's paying for welfare and a number of other things, Medicaid. So yes, you can move that stuff around, but $2.5 billion out of $5.5 billion is a pretty sizable chunk. So we've talked about gas taxes, we've talked about vehicle registration fees. Professor Fisher laid out a number of options on some things we can do. One of the things that we're hearing right now is they're talking about changing the amortization period of our school pensions, and if you stretch that out longer, then you free up money, it frees up cash flow. And we've all, watched the old Popeye commercial or cartoons of long ago, Wimpy saying, "I'll surely give you $2 tomorrow for a hamburger today." Well, this is a hamburger we consumed 5 years ago, and we're hoping 40 years from now they're going to pay for it. This just isn't good government, folks. We promised those pensions. We've made reforms to close down the system to control those costs. Pushing that money out further and further is not a good idea. They're going to look at truck revenues, I suspect, at some point. Trucks are doing a lot of damage. We're a manufacturing state, right? We can't put up the gate and say no trucks allowed if we're going to keep the autos going, if we're going to keep being a manufacturing state. We're going to have to have the trucks here, but let's have them pay for the damage they do on the roads. They do far more damage than others. And one of the other things we've been talking about is local option taxes. We were talking before we got started that Michigan's system, when you look at it, really is an outlier, and it's an outlier on both ends of the system. We have about 8% of our whole road system is state roads. County roads are, like 60 or 70%, and then city roads make up the difference. If you go to most other states, then the state road system is much bigger as a percent of the total, and the local roads, you know, shrink in relative percent. But on the other end of it, we are very state dependent on where the money comes from. We have the state gas tax, we have the state vehicle registration fees, and as Craig said, that all goes into a pot, and this Act 51 shuffles it out, little for you, little for you, little for you, good luck, go forth and do great things. But the biggest problem is our local road system. The governor's plan is very much focused on funding the state road system, getting 696 fixed, getting Southfield Road fixed, but you spend a lot of time on a lot of other roads, don't you? You want those to be fixed. Those potholes hurt just as much as the ones on Southfield Road. So we either come up with more money and hope that Act 51 can do the things. I happen to disagree that Act 51 is a great thing that we shouldn't mess with. I think we could do much better. But the alternative is let's just allow the local governments to come up with the money they need, but let's not do it with the property tax, which is the only source available. We are one of only 9 states that don't allow a local option sales tax. So local option sales tax could be funding infrastructure, not only our roads, but cultural facilities, just, you know, a broad range of things that are important to us as citizens in Southeast Michigan and things we want to have. And so when I do this up north, they're like, well, that's fine for Southeast Michigan, right? But what about Traverse City and the UP? And I tell them, well, when I drive up to Traverse City, my wife takes the credit cards and she's hitting Front Street, and you're getting sales tax up there. Plus all that money, all the gas that I drove to get up there, I need a tank full to get back. I'm going to be hitting the gas station before I go back. Now they're getting gas tax money up there. The same thing, the West Coast, the UP. We're a very tourism-oriented state, and there is the benefit of that. There are 11 states that have local option gas taxes. So the amount of driving in each county, the amount of driving in Southeast Michigan, keep that money here, allow us to fix our own roads with the money that's available. 33 states authorize local vehicle registration fees. So again, there's an opportunity. We have the vehicles here. We have a number of things that we could do to fix those. So, you know, I think we've covered a broad range here. I don't think I need to go on much longer. I'd be happy to hear what questions you have and how are we going to fix this system.
Thank you, Mr. Lifford. Okay, so now we want to take some questions. I think we're going to ad lib a little bit here. So if you have a question, raise your hand and speak loudly. Yes, ma'am.
This is a question for the city manager here. I get your emails regularly, and there was one just on July 11th about as Michigan looks to increase road funding, both the governor and legislature take their shot at finding billions. That is the, and you talked about some you know, reforms, and then you said that our suggested reforms seek to address these shortcomings, and I guess I'd like to understand what you meant by your suggested reforms.
So we put out a paper. Yeah.
Repeat a little
All right.
bit, maybe, so that everybody hears.
So the Citizens Research Council has been very active in this road funding debate, trying to describe the issues and help people understand not only why we have a road funding problem, but what are the alternatives are doing that. And her question is the specifics of it. So in March, just before the governor came out with her proposal, we put out a paper that sort of laid out, as I said, laid out the issue, and we said, here's what we need to do about it. First, we need to come up with more money, and we explored the issues. You could do it with gas tax or vehicle registration fees, but we also explored the income tax, the sales tax, a number of other sources, and what does it mean to come up with that? You know, how is the tax going to increase? Would it be dedicated to roads or not? that type of thing. We said that it needs to be dedicated for roads. The legislature has made poor decisions in the past, and we want to have the certainty of where it's going. We thought that we ought to disentangle the gas tax and the sales tax. Right now, 30% of all the taxes you pay at the pump are not going for roads, they're going for schools and local governments, because the sales tax isn't meant to fund the roads. So we thought that is confusing, and we have a road funding problem, so the money paid at the pump should go to fix the funding at the pump. We thought that it should be a one-time fix. Let's not do like we did in 2015 and say, here's 1.2 of our $3.5 billion problem, come back in a few years. Let's figure out how to fix it and come up with a plan to fix it. So those were the number of elements that were in our plan. Our paper in July went through and evaluated the governor's plan against those initial recommendations, saying, yes, she comes up with $2.5 billion, but she wants to fund some other things, so there's only $1.9 billion that's actually going to go to roads. She doesn't wish to disentangle the sales tax and the gas taxes. So there's some good things and some bad things about it, and we recognize in that paper that her proposal is a starting point, right? In the negotiation, at some point, somebody has to go first. Somebody has to put something on the table for us to react to, and I don't think her office really expected that 45 cents per gallon was going to be the final solution, but you got to start somewhere. So that's where we're at.
Great, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My question is for Dr. Fisher. In your talk, you talked about vehicle mileage fee. Can you explain how that would be collected?
Well, there are a lot of ways to collect it. The simplest way would be to just, every year when you register your car, you declare how much mileage you've driven. And you say, oh, people will cheat, except when you go to sell your car in Michigan, the mileage is registered. And so it would catch up on you. It would be a very simple system to do. Other states, Oregon, that has implemented such a system now has an electronic collection system. So you pay at the gasoline pump, and it reads a gadget from your car about mileage, and you pay the fee that way. You could have other electronic GPS kinds of things in your car. The insurance companies now have some of these kinds of things that allow you to do that. But the simplest way would just be, initially, in some states they have requirements. In New York, for example, cars have to be inspected every year. So you have not only a car registration, you have a car inspection sticker on your license plate or on your car. So the mileage could be indicated when your car is inspected. We don't have an inspection system in Michigan. So there are a lot of ways it could be done. Eventually, I'm confident that vehicle mileage fees will be utilized to a large degree. They'll be collected electronically as cars become more and more electronically connected. And that's happening slowly, but the economist who first suggested this idea, by the way, wrote about it in 1962, well before there was any this kind of electronic stuff. So there's very simple ways to collect this kind of thing, vehicle mileage fee. There are a lot of issues about it. They're complicated. What about out-of-state travel? What about trucks? There's a lot of issues to do it. It's not a simple thing. But none of these things are simple. Right? But it's an idea to put on the table that I hope people will start thinking about.
Yeah, so you mentioned the out-of-state travel, and that's part of it. If you paid a one-time fee, you'd have to sort of ballpark how much was in Michigan versus out of Michigan. These sensors, the biggest pushback on these sensors is the privacy, right? So does the government know where you're driving? Well, Google does. Why shouldn't the government? We have, in fact, been doing it with trucks. Right, trucks are so much into interstate travel, it's all pro-rationed. How much was in Michigan, Ohio, Tennessee, and Kentucky, and that state benefits proportionally to the gas tax and the registration fees they're paying. So trucks are already doing it. It's a case of bringing cars up to speed with what trucks are already doing.
It's very easy to collect this fee from trucks because of what Eric said. Mileage in the state is already recorded, and the privacy issues people worry about with electronic collection. But everybody has one of these guys, right? If you got one of these, you're being tracked. So it's no different of having one of these in your pocket or in your hand as opposed to having one in your car that registers your mileage. And eventually it will happen. But I think it's an idea that I think economists, I'm putting it out there so that it will be discussed.
Yes, sir.
Now, it occurs to me, looking at the map of the United States, there's 3 peninsula states, which means that the government probably pays less money for the roads, the federal government, because it's not going through any place. So Florida, Michigan, and Maine. Maine, northern Maine, it's not that big a deal because nobody lives there. In northern Michigan, it's a bigger deal because more people live there. In Florida, it's not too bad because southern Florida has a huge population. And so they get a lot of traffic on the interstate roads. What have we done?
So I think that the question is about the fact that Michigan is a peninsula state. And I guess that interacts particularly with the idea of toll roads, right? Because nobody's driving through a toll road. Can one of you speak to that issue? Maybe that's an economic issue for.
Well, I think the argument that there isn't a lot of traffic going through Michigan, I think is not accurate. Because the truck traffic that travels through the state on I-69 down to 96 or to 94 is tremendous. There's a tremendous amount of truck traffic that goes through the state, and trucks that travel through the state may not purchase gasoline in the state. So they may not be contributing to the gasoline tax to the state at all. They do pay fees, but a toll would, pardon me? They could pay a road tax, but why shouldn't that tax be based upon how many miles they drive in the state? And now you're talking about a vehicle mileage fee, a type of toll, essentially.
The problem is fairly easy to solve by just raising the truck tax.
Raising the,
Truck tax.
So
They're the ones that have the heavy axles, they have the numerous axles, they're the ones that wreck the roads. My little car's not gonna harm any road.
So one option would be to vary a use tax or vary a gas tax by the type of vehicle, whether that's weight, mileage, whatever. Okay.
Yes. So let me
Okay.
speak a little bit to the toll roads.
Go ahead.
We recognize there's some role for it, but I-69 that goes from Port Huron down into Indiana really is the exception for Michigan. You're not taking I-75 to get to Wisconsin or 31 or the different north-south roads. So to some extent, a toll road would be another means of taxing Michiganders to drive on Michigan roads, as opposed to Ohio and Indiana, Pennsylvania, New York, where it really is throughway. So, you can fuel up in New Jersey and get into Indiana before you need to stop and fill up again if you have a good fuel-efficient car, and that's cutting a few states out of benefiting from it. Those toll roads allow them to benefit. In Michigan, with some exception, we really would be just taxing ourselves and be another means of doing that. It would be in proportion to usage of the roads, but to what end we could think of other ways to do that.
The other element of that is that the third largest industry in Michigan is tourism, and traditionally the tourism industry has fought tooth and nail any suggestion of putting a toll on the road, because that can be seen, at least, as a disincentive for people to travel to Michigan from out of state. Whether that's true or not is debatable, but they've always been a very strong lobby against toll roads in Michigan.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, in the back. Yes, yes, you. Yes.
First, the idea of making it a percentage of the tax would not have worked very well these last few years, would it? The price of gasoline has gone dramatically down. And in fact, to me, that's the time you put on the tax, because it'll be all about the same. You were paying $3 and something. Okay, you're gonna pay $3 and something, but some of them go towards the tax. My second comment is your idea of doing, I think yours, of doing local taxes. Anyway, the concern with that is that the wealthy communities will be able to tax a lot more, have a lot more services, have better roads, like Oakland County, if we put a tax in Oakland County. And I just don't think that's a reasonable solution.
If I could address that, we proposed, prior to the Great Recession, we got a statewide coalition together to try to work for a local option sales tax. And part of our agreement was that we and Wayne and Macomb, the three tri-county areas, would work together, because there would have been huge opposition from businesses in Oakland County if we applied a local option sales tax only in Oakland County. The argument being that then some customers would travel across 8 Mile to buy their goods, or DeQuinder to buy their goods in either Wayne County or Macomb County. So we had a coalition that was willing to do that. We had a statewide coalition all the way from the UP to the Ohio border, and yet in 2006, 7, and 8, we couldn't get a single legislator to even seriously consider introducing a bill to allow us a local option sales tax. And it also would have taken a change to the state constitution, which would have required a statewide vote of the electorate. So it's a challenging thing to do, and it's politically difficult to do, but I fully agree that it would be a smart thing to do.
Right. So your first point was about the gas tax, and the trick is always in the timing. You want to set that percent at the lowest point. We always have armchair quarterbacking to know we should have done it a month ago, and we missed that point. So the trick is in the timing. It's a crapshoot when you do that and how you do that. On the other local option taxes, the devil's in the detail, right? How you do that. We certainly would be opponent of doing it at the most local level, at the city and township level. We have 1,800 units of government, and for you to say, if you're in Southfield, it's one rate. If you're in Clawson, it's the next. If you're in Royal Oak, it's a different rate. It's got to be either at the county level or at the region level. They defined it as Wayne, Oakland, Macomb. You might define it another way. The RTA includes Washington on our region. So we could do it a number of different ways, and then you have to figure out, well, how do you get the money to those agencies that are actually taking care of the roads? How do you figure that out? Other states are doing it, so it's not like we have to start from scratch and say, how do we do this? Let's ask Indiana how they do it. Let's ask Florida how they do it, and come up with the plan that best suits Michigan. But the part of our problem, if I can, just a little bit more, when you start talking about increasing taxes, the first thing that people want to know is, how do we compare to other states? Well, our 26 cents per gallon is pretty average. It's pretty close to the US average. But our 26 cents per gallon is going to fund the whole system, and you're comparing that against other states where their 25 or 26 cents a gallon is just funding their state system, and there's local taxes to fund their local systems. So we're comparing apples and pineapples, and then we don't compare very well. Well, let's catch up to what the other states are doing and finding ways to give the local governments the tools to fund their own needs.
Thank you. I'm gonna try and repeat the question so we make sure everybody can hear. Yes, sir.
First of all, very good presentation. My question and a question for Professor Fisher. Your analysis is kind of typical of the political process. We look at the gas tax, the gas tax, there were 52 out of 53 gas tax. But nobody budgets that I know, they're called household budgets, household economists. We have a line item for gas tax. They have a line item that says the cost of ownership of the car, how much it costs to the car. And most of the solutions that talk about raising taxes don't recognize in Michigan, on the insurance side, and the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Fund, we are very high, very high. And while I think, your point, taking money from pensions is a terrible idea, borrowing money from the $32 billion slush fund is, with the MCC is a great idea from my point of view. How do you see that offering the voters and people kind of a quid pro quo approach? These things are all going to raise this tax, but we're not going to talk about insurance until we do this stuff. Is there a way for you to put this in the context of total ownership of the vehicle for the homeowner? And is there a possibility politically that you can strike a deal that is not just is it 45 cents or is it 44 cents, but it's you're going to go up over here, but you're going to go down over there. So what are the broader solutions to kind of crack the stalemate we're in?
So the question is, for a voter who perceives the cost of roads in the larger package of owning a car, you've got the lease payment, you've got insurance, which we know in Michigan is a particular challenge. How do we look at the cost of road repair in that larger picture?
So the
Any
good news
volunteers?
is that the legislature a few months ago tackled our no-fault auto insurance system. They created some choice, so you don't have to have the gold standard that Michigan has long maintained, where you have unlimited lifetime benefits if you're in a catastrophic accident. You may choose a lesser plan. They've taken away some parameters that insurance companies were using to base insurance rates on your credit history and some things like that. The insurance companies now have a year and 3 months to figure out how to implement that. So it's not going to kick in right away. The plan they came up with was a plan that the Republicans had been pushing, very much favors the insurance company at the expense of the healthcare providers who had been pushing in other types of reforms. And when it was finally put together and the package was agreed to, Governor Whitmer signed off on it. She got a little pushback in some things that the Democratic Party wanted, but she signed off on it. And those of us watching assume that there was some sort of quid pro quo. She's going to give in on the auto insurance, but the Republicans were going to have to do something to help get this road funding package across the finish line. Maybe we are reading the tea leaves a little wrong, because we haven't seen that yet. They have attempted to do something about auto insurance. I can't guarantee you that there's going to be huge changes in rates. We just don't know enough yet, and it's really going to be driver specific. Some people are going to benefit more than others.
What other questions do we have? Jenny, yes.
Let's talk about bridges. How does that fit in? Let's talk about, I mean, I'm not only annoyed at the roads, but I fear for my safety sometimes when I dodge a pothole, which I do frequently on 8 Mile. So I have a greater concern about the status of our bridge and how that's to be addressed in all that you've spoken about tonight.
So the concern is, what about bridges? They are a fundamental part of our infrastructure. Is there any particular funding or expense issue related to bridges per se? Craig, can you touch on the experience in Oakland County?
Absolutely, it's a great question. First of all, address the safety concern. We and every other road agency in the state inspects the bridges on a very frequent basis. Every bridge in Oakland County is inspected at least every 2 years. If there's any sign of deterioration, the frequency of the inspections increases. If it were at all dangerous, the bridge would be shut down. So if you're able to drive on it, it's extremely unlikely there's any safety risk to you. And we monitor that very closely. Secondly, the bridges were a little bit unique in Oakland County in that our bridges are actually in much better shape collectively than our roads. We've been very aggressive. There is a special pot of money at the state called the Local Bridge Fund for local road agencies to use to repair and replace bridges. And we've been very aggressive and very successful at getting that funding. We also, unlike Macomb County, we have more short bridges because we have a lot of the originations of the water sources in Oakland County. They have fewer bridges, but more large bridges because they have the bridges that the rivers that get wider as they get out towards Lake St. Clair and Lake Ontario, Lake Huron. So we don't have as much of a bridge problem in Oakland County. It is a bigger problem statewide, but it's a subcomponent of, I would say, of the road funding problem in general. But as far as safety, I would not fear that there's a great risk of any bridge collapsing as you're driving across it.
Do trucks do the same amount of damage or wear and tear on bridges as they do on roads?
Yes, and some people would argue more if they hit a bump on a bridge and the axles all come down at the same time, they're going to potentially do some serious damage. But trucks need to pay more revenue. We believe they don't pay their fair share, but they are not the cause for poor roads in Michigan. Road funding in our humble opinions, is the cause of the road problem in Michigan. They are a small piece of the puzzle, but they're not the main culprit.
We should be clear, we've talked all along about road funding. That's meant to generically meant both the roads and the bridges. Notwithstanding that little pot of money, all the money comes in, pays for roads and bridges collectively.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to ask what criteria is used to select which roads, which pot,
So
those red lines you had.
Right.
So the question is, what's the criteria to prioritize road repair or reconstruction? And let me ask that question just in terms of the way we do it today, and then would either of you have a recommendation on how we might change that process going forward? And again, Craig, why don't you talk about the Oakland County experience?
Sure, and I would argue that selection process works extremely well and does not need a lot of, I mean, there's always room for improvement, but does not need to be, wholesale revised. We have a number of factors that we look at in that selection process, and it varies from type of project. But the number one factor in every one of our criteria is safety. Is there a crash history on that road? And we are very data reliant when it comes to that. We study all of the crash reports, especially serious injuries and fatalities, and we look at, is there a road element to that? What can we do from a safety point of view? Next, we look at traffic volume. We look at condition. We monitor the condition very closely. We look at, again, traffic volume is a big factor. Population, number of complaints we get about a road is a factor that comes into that. But there are a lot of those factors that all come together, and ultimately it's an engineering decision based on those factors.
I think Oakland may be an outlier. A number of states are now trying to build a database of their infrastructure amounts and standards, because in many cases, states simply don't know. Not just roads, but in general, what buildings they have, what the quality, what the condition of those buildings is. They haven't got a plan, a long-run plan for infrastructure investment. And so many states are now in the process of trying to develop much more complicated technological mechanisms to sort of monitor the amount and condition of their infrastructure broadly defined. And it's something that's been a major problem, and Oakland County may be an outlier in the degree to which they've monitored their road quality. So I don't think that's very common nationwide.
Although I would say that in the state of Michigan, about 10 years ago, when we had been going to the legislature for years saying there's an impending road funding crisis, please help us before something terrible happens. So now we're at that point. But we were saying for years, and the legislature finally said to us, how do you know? Show us the data that you have a road funding problem in Michigan. What condition are your roads in? And while we had some data, many agencies in the state did not. So back then, about 10 years ago, the state mandated that every road agency in Michigan use the same scale to rate all of our roads on an annual basis. So we are all required in Michigan to have a database of what condition all of our roads are, at least all of our federal aid eligible roads, the larger roads. So Michigan has done a pretty decent job of using data to categorize and identify the condition of our roads.
When I lived one time in Rhode Island, and when I was in graduate school, and we were renting a house, and we were fascinated that the road in front of us in this house was always in terrific condition, always terrific condition. It was repaved like twice a year, and when it snowed, it was plowed like within 15 minutes, and it took a long time for us to figure it out, because why was this little group of graduate students, and we discovered that the fellow across the street was the president of the city council.
Certainly that doesn't happen in Oakland County. Sir, you had a question. Yes, please.
Question is for Mr. Bryson. What kind of research has the RCOC done about cost savings by using newer or different materials, maybe like more impervious to freeze loss?
That's a great question. And
So the question is, what can we do with newer materials, more modern science to either reduce the cost of repairs or increase the life?
Thank you. Great question. We hear all the time, you know, Ohio's roads must be in better shape because they use better material. Let me first make a statement, then I'll kind of answer the question. There is no silver bullet. Our engineers work with engineers from all across the country. We serve on the National Research Board, the Transportation Research Board, which is the body established to provide information to the President and Congress about science issues. We are, you know, key members of the research committees on that board. We know what kind of materials are used across the country. The materials used in Ohio don't really vary much from ours. The materials used in Wisconsin don't vary much from ours. The difference is all those other states use a lot more of those materials. We simply don't do as much road repairs as they do. But again, we are part of the TRB, the Transportation Research Board. We're not an academic institution. We do rely on places like Michigan State, but we have very qualified engineers, and they work with academic institutions, with the Federal Highway Administration, with other institutions, state departments of transportation, local departments of transportation across the country to study these issues. And the materials do change every year. The recipe, if you will, for concrete changes every year based on climate and all kinds of other things. It's a constantly evolving thing intended to best address, you know, the situation in the world right now. We do. You know, Germany has often pointed out that the Autobahn, you know, you can go as fast as you want and the road never falls apart and it's great shape. Well, first of all, Germany has a gas tax of about $6 a gallon compared to our 26 cents a gallon. But if you also look at what they do build a deeper road base. And over the years, we've been studying how Germany does that for years. Over the years, we have increased the depth of our road base, not as deep as they use in the Autobahn in Germany because we don't have $6 a gallon gas tax revenues, but our base is now much deeper than it was, say, in the 60s and 70s because we studied what they do in Germany.
Your question's a great one, though, that Professor Fisher showed us that Michigan's dead last in spending on roads, and when you think about the environment we live in, right, surrounded by the Great Lakes, a lot of marshy land or riverbeds, a manufacturing state, a state that goes through a severe freeze-thaw cycle. Craig can add all, you know, number of things to the list here. All of those beg the idea that we should be at the top of the list, not at the bottom of the list. We should be taxing ourselves at a rate that we can build to those Autobahn standards. And if we did so, we wouldn't be having the discussion every 5 years coming back saying, how are we going to come up with more money? We would build roads that last and we would maintain those roads. But instead we're building to, you know, instead of Cadillac standards, we're building to Ford Focus standards. Not that there's anything wrong with a Ford Focus.
Watch out there. I mean,
you know, but you get my point. Let's do it right the first time. Let's engineer it to last instead of building roads that are going to disintegrate in 20 years and have to pay for it all over again.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I want to move on to closing comments. Maybe we can start with you, Mr. Lufer. Just maybe give us a couple minutes on you know, what you think the road forward, if you'll excuse the expression, what the road forward should be, and how can us as citizens participate in that?
So the road forward, our legislative leadership, the Republican caucus in Lansing has to come up with their ideas and put them on the table so we can start to react to them. So far, we've only had the governor's proposal, and as I said, I don't think that was ever put out as the be-all, end-all, but where do you start the discussion? So they have been having hearings. They did a lot of information gathering. When I started this process back in March, I was a bit skeptical, but that's my 32 years of doing this, that we've been down this road a number of times. We sort of know what the answers are. And at some point I reminded myself that 2/3 of the legislature are freshmen this year. This is a new issue for them. So you know, kudos to them in retrospect. Kudos to them for thinking about these issues and not assuming that there's only one way to do this. But it's time for action. We've already lost this construction season. If they don't get going soon, we're going to lose the next construction season. every day we wait, another road goes into bad condition. It's time to do something. Even if it's a bad plan, it's a plan. Let's do something. So it's time to get going, I guess, is my message.
Thank you. Mr. Bryson?
What Eric said. But I would add that the challenge for us is to continue to educate people. I think both of these gentlemen had amazing information in their presentations today that we all could benefit from being aware of, and we in the road business have to do a better job of explaining why we need more money. We can't just assume that everybody knows this minutia that we live with day and night. So that's the big challenge going forward, and I agree with Eric that I give kudos to the legislature for finally recognizing there's an issue, although we've been telling them for 30 years there's a problem, but they finally have recognized it and seem to have some interest in actually resolving it. So if we can just be persistent and keep making the points to them and keep educating people, I think we may ultimately at least move closer to solving the problem in Michigan.
Thank you. Professor Fisher?
I'd say two things about the education need. The first is the legislature and independent agencies are talking about $2.5 billion of additional money for road and bridge work in Michigan per year. And that seems like such a huge amount of money. But here's the story that I tell. We had a really wet spring. And a lot of people in Michigan noticed, oh, gee, I've got some spots inside. It looks like my roof may be leaking. So I call the roofing expert, and he comes and he says, yeah, you've got 3 leaks on your roof. I can fix them for you, but your roof is 25 years old, and that's about the length of a roof in Michigan, a shingle roof in Michigan. I can fix these spots, but I'm going to be back in 6 months fixing more spots. I say, okay, you're probably right. Give me an estimate for replacing the roof. The guy says, well, it'll be $8,000. I said, $8,000, sticker shock. But then I do the calculation. It lasts 25 years. That's 75 cents a day. Am I willing to spend 75 cents a day to have a roof over my head that keeps me dry? And the answer, of course, is yes. But I'm not. We don't pay 75 cents a day. I pay nothing for 25 years, and all of a sudden I've got a $8,000 bill. That's what's happened to us in roads. And so I think we need to explain to people, with that kind of understanding why this magnitude of money exists. The second education component I think the state and local agencies need to do a better job of is explaining to people exactly how much they pay. Because all of the surveys show that people overestimate how much they're paying in gasoline taxes by a dramatic amount. And I think it's natural. You don't see, it's a hidden tax. You just go into the gas station, you pay $3 a gallon. You don't exactly know how much it is. People get confused between the state tax and the federal tax and the price of the gasoline. So you're paying $12 a month, folks. $12 a month for roads in the state. And I think the state and the local government agencies, government in general, and people in my business, educators, need to do a better job of explaining the magnitude of these taxes, what the prices are, so that people understand a little bit more about how different funding options will affect them individually.
Thank you. That's great. So thank you to all our panelists, Eric Ufer from the Citizens Research Council, Craig Bryson from the Road Commission for Oakland County, and Ron Fisher from the MSU School of Economics. Thanks also to all the other volunteers from the League of Women Voters. Sure appreciate your participation. Thanks to the City of Lathrup Village for giving us this fabulous facility, particularly Mike and his crew that have been doing all the AV work. This will be on all the major cable channels. It'll also be on our website. Please encourage your friends and families to take a look at it since they weren't able to be here today. And then finally, thanks to you. Thanks to all of you in the audience for being here, for being engaged voters, for trying to work to educate yourself about these important issues. As we like to say in the League, democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to participate. So thank all of you for being here and being part of that. Please drive safe on your way home.
Avoid the potholes.